What happens when a country loses its most powerful leader, but months later still struggles to convince the world and perhaps even itself that the transition of power is complete? More importantly, how do you measure political stability when official ceremonies project confidence while public appearances, internal messaging, and diplomatic activity appear to tell different stories? Those questions have become increasingly relevant as Iran conducts an extended period of national mourning following the reported death of Supreme Leader Ali Khamenei. According to publicly available reporting and open source assessments referenced by multiple international media outlets, the ceremonies have taken place months after the strike that reportedly killed him during a period of heightened military confrontation between Iran, Israel, and the United States. While many operational details surrounding that event remain disputed or unverified, the political consequences are already becoming a subject of intense international analysis. Rather than viewing these ceremonies simply as a state funeral, analysts increasingly describe them as an important test of the Islamic Republic's ability to demonstrate continuity after suffering what military strategists would call a potential leadership decapitation event. Throughout modern history, governments have generally prepared succession mechanisms for precisely this reason. Removing a national leader may create temporary disruption, but whether that disruption evolves into a broader crisis depends largely on how effectively institutions continue functioning afterward. That institutional question now sits at the center of international attention. Iran's political system has always been unique. Unlike many governments where executive authority is concentrated in an elected president, Iran's supreme leader occupies the highest constitutional position, exercising influence over national security policy, the armed forces, the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, intelligence organizations, and broad strategic decision-making. Because in that structure, any uncertainty surrounding succession naturally attracts significant attention from governments across the Middle East and beyond. According to open source reporting, the funeral ceremonies were postponed several times because of ongoing military operations and regional instability before eventually taking place over several days across multiple cities. From a logistical perspective, the delay itself illustrates how closely domestic politics and national security became intertwined. Instead of separating wartime operations from state rituals, Iranian authorities ultimately merged the two into one highly symbolic event. That symbolism matters. Throughout history, state funerals have rarely been only about honoring the deceased. They also serve as carefully choreographed demonstrations of political legitimacy. Military formations, foreign delegations, and televised ceremonies all communicate one central message: the government remains functional, unified, and firmly in control. However, political theater only succeeds if audiences believe the performance. International observers have therefore focused not only on the size of the crowds, but also on what occurred around the ceremonies themselves. Reports have described unusually heavy security measures, restrictions on airspace over Tehran, extensive coordination by emergency services, and an extraordinary level of planning for crowd management. None of those measures are unusual by themselves for a high-profile state funeral. Together, however, they illustrate the government's recognition that such gatherings also represent potential security vulnerabilities. From a military perspective, this concern is understandable. Large public events concentrate senior political leaders, military commanders, foreign dignitaries, and enormous civilian crowds into relatively confined areas. Modern precision strike capabilities, unmanned aerial systems, sabotage operations, and asymmetric attacks have fundamentally changed how governments think about protecting these events. Security planners today must prepare not only for conventional threats but also for drones, cyber disruptions, intelligence leaks, lone actors, and mass casualty crowd incidents. According to publicly available assessments, Iranian authorities devoted considerable resources to preventing precisely those scenarios during the mourning period. Yet the most discussed question throughout the ceremonies was not about security. It was about leadership. Several analysts noted the limited public visibility of Mujtaba Khamenei, who has frequently been mentioned in international reporting as a potential successor or influential figure within Iran's political establishment. At the time of writing, there has been considerable speculation regarding his absence from several highly publicized events. Some observers suggest security concerns may explain the decision. Others believe health considerations or internal political calculations could be factors. None of these explanations have been officially confirmed, making definitive conclusions impossible. Even so, the absence itself became part of the story. In authoritarian political systems, symbolism often carries strategic significance equal to formal announcements. A single public appearance, seating arrangement, or ceremonial role can signal confidence, continuity, or internal consensus. Likewise, an unexplained absence can generate speculation far beyond what officials intended. Whether those interpretations ultimately prove accurate remains uncertain. What is already clear, however, is that Iran's funeral ceremonies evolved into something much larger than a memorial service. They became a global demonstration watched simultaneously by domestic audiences, regional rivals, intelligence agencies, financial markets, and diplomatic negotiators, all attempting to answer the same fundamental question. After one of the most significant leadership shocks in the history of the Islamic Republic, who was actually steering the country forward. If Part 1 focused on the symbolism of the funeral itself, Part 2 asks a different question. Why would governments around the world pay such close attention to a ceremonial event months after the reported death of a national leader? The answer has very little to do with mourning and almost everything to do with how modern states manage strategic uncertainty. Military planners often describe leadership as the central nervous system of a country's national security apparatus. Removing senior commanders or political leaders is not automatically decisive, but it forces every institution beneath them to adapt under pressure. The immediate challenge is rarely replacing one individual. Instead, it is preserving confidence that the chain of command remains intact. History provides numerous examples. During the Cold War, both NATO and the Soviet Union invested heavily in succession planning because they understood that uncertainty could be just as dangerous as military defeat. More recently, governments confronting insurgencies or terrorist organizations have repeatedly attempted what analysts call leadership decapitation strategies, operations intended to remove key decision-makers rather than destroy entire military forces. The results have been mixed. Some organizations collapse after losing senior leadership. Others adapt surprisingly quickly because authority has already been distributed among multiple institutions. In other words, removing a leader is only the beginning of the strategic equation. That broader principle helps explain why Iran's transition has attracted such extensive international attention. The supreme leader is not simply a symbolic figure. Under Iran's constitutional structure, the office exercises significant influence over national defense policy, the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, intelligence organizations, nuclear decision-making, and overall strategic direction. Any perceived uncertainty surrounding that office naturally raises questions about policy continuity. According to publicly available reporting, one of the most closely watched developments has been the visibility or lack of visibility of figures widely believed to play important roles in the succession process. Open-minded source analysts caution against drawing firm conclusions from public appearances alone. Senior officials may remain out of view for numerous reasons, including security precautions, medical recovery, or deliberate political messaging. Nevertheless, intelligence professionals routinely analyze exactly these kinds of indicators because authoritarian governments often communicate indirectly through ceremony rather than public debate. This is where information warfare becomes especially important. Modern geopolitical competition extends far beyond missiles and military hardware. Governments now compete continuously in what military theorists describe as the information domain. Every official photograph, televised speech, military parade, diplomatic meeting, or public appearance can become part of a broader strategic narrative aimed at multiple audiences. Iran's funeral ceremonies therefore served several objectives simultaneously. For domestic audiences, they projected continuity after an unprecedented leadership crisis. For regional partners, they signaled that existing alliances remained operational. For adversaries, they attempted to demonstrate that command structures had survived despite reports of a successful decapitation strike. And for the broader international community, they reinforced the message that the Iranian state remained capable of governing despite extraordinary pressure. Whether those messages achieved their intended effect is another matter entirely. According to analysts following events inside Iran, the ceremonies also highlighted ongoing debates over the country's diplomatic direction. Some political factions have continued supporting negotiations intended to reduce regional tensions, while others have argued that compromise could weaken Iran's strategic position. These competing perspectives are not unique to Iran. Virtually every government facing a major security crisis experiences internal disagreements over how much risk to accept through diplomacy versus deterrence. The challenge becomes far greater during a leadership transition. Without an undisputed political center, disagreements that previously remained private can become increasingly visible. While it is difficult to measure the true extent of those divisions from outside the country, public statements reported during the mourning period suggested that multiple factions were attempting to shape the national conversation regarding Iran's future strategic direction. At the same time, external pressures have not disappeared. Israel continues to emphasize that it retains the capability to strike strategic targets if it believes national security requires it. The United States remains heavily engaged in regional diplomacy while maintaining a substantial military presence across the Middle East. Gulf states continue balancing security partnerships with economic interests. While global energy markets closely monitor every development affecting the Strait of Hormuz, that waterway remains one of the world's most strategically significant maritime choke points. A substantial share of globally traded oil passes through the narrow corridor connecting the Persian Gulf to international shipping lanes. Even temporary uncertainty surrounding navigation through the strait can influence insurance costs, shipping schedules, and global energy prices. As a result, leadership stability inside Iran extends well beyond domestic politics. International investors, military planners, intelligence agencies, and foreign governments all recognize that decisions made in Tehran can influence energy security, regional deterrence, and diplomatic negotiations across the broader Middle East. For that reason, the funeral was never simply about honoring the past. It also became an opportunity for observers to assess the future, not necessarily by listening to official speeches, but by watching who appeared beside the casket, which foreign delegations attended, how security forces operated, what political messages emerged from the crowds, and perhaps most importantly, which questions remained unanswered once the ceremonies concluded. Because in geopolitical crises, uncertainty itself is often the most valuable intelligence. In this scenario, the first 40-8 hours become the most dangerous period not because of another missile strike, but because of uncertainty. Military headquarters remain operational, Air-defense units stay on maximum alert, and senior commanders continue issuing public statements intended to reassure both domestic and foreign audiences. According to this fictional scenario, no immediate collapse occurs. Government ministries continue functioning, emergency communications remain active, and critical infrastructure stays online. From the outside, the state appears intact. Inside the system, however, a different process begins. Emergency meetings are reportedly held among senior political leaders, Revolutionary Guard commanders, intelligence officials, and members of the Assembly of Experts. Their first objective is not retaliation but continuity. Before any strategic decision can be made, the government must establish who has the authority to make it. This reflects a reality seen throughout history. During moments of national crisis, preserving the chain of command often becomes more important than launching an immediate military response. Meanwhile, Tehran enters an unprecedented security posture. Major roads surrounding government districts are closed. Airspace restrictions remain in effect. Additional checkpoints appear throughout the capital, while cyber-defense teams monitor government networks for signs of coordinated intrusion. Intelligence services also begin a parallel operation. Rather than searching only for external threats, they focus on identifying potential information leaks inside the government. Every communication, travel record, and classified document is reviewed for signs that foreign intelligence services may have penetrated sensitive institutions before the strike. In modern conflicts, strategic surprise rarely results from technology alone. It usually reflects months or even years of intelligence collection. As these internal investigations continue, preparations begin for what will become one of the largest state ceremonies in the country's history, originally intended to occur only weeks after the leadership strike. The funeral is repeatedly delayed by ongoing military tensions and regional instability. According to this fictional timeline, officials eventually choose a multi-city procession designed to project national unity while allowing millions of citizens to participate. From a political perspective, the ceremony serves several objectives simultaneously. It honors the country's former leader. It demonstrates institutional continuity. Perhaps most importantly, it signals to foreign governments that the Islamic Republic continues functioning despite suffering what analysts describe as a decapitation strike. International delegations begin arriving from friendly governments and regional partners. State television emphasizes diplomatic meetings, military honors, and carefully choreographed public ceremonies. Helicopter footage shows enormous crowds moving through Tehran's streets, while commentators describe the turnout as evidence of national solidarity. Yet open-minded source observers notice something different. Attention gradually shifts away from the funeral itself and toward who is and is not standing beside the casket. In authoritarian political systems, symbolism often communicates more than official speeches. Camera angles are analyzed frame by frame. Seating arrangements become headlines. The order in which officials greet foreign delegations receives almost as much attention as the ceremonies themselves. Most notably, Speculation grows regarding the continued absence of the individual widely expected to represent the next generation of leadership. Within this fictional scenario, government spokespeople offer no detailed explanation. Some analysts argue that extraordinary security concerns justify limiting public appearances. Others suggest medical recovery following the earlier attack. Still others believe the absence reflects ongoing negotiations among competing political factions over the exact structure of the future leadership. At this stage, none of those theories can be independently verified. As the funeral procession continues, another challenge emerges. Several public speeches emphasize national resilience and resistance against foreign adversaries. At the same time, fictional reporting suggests competing political factions attempt to use the ceremonies to strengthen their own influence within the post-crisis government. What begins as a memorial gradually becomes a political stage. Crowds supporting different ideological currents chant competing slogans. Some demand a harder military response. Others argue that preserving national stability must remain the government's highest priority. The divide does not necessarily represent a collapse of state authority, but it illustrates the competing strategic visions developing inside the leadership. Beyond Tehran, foreign intelligence agencies monitor every development. Commercial satellites observe military installations. Naval forces operating near the Persian Gulf increase surveillance patrols. Energy markets react cautiously as analysts attempt to determine whether the political transition will affect commercial shipping through the Strait of Hormuz. Despite the uncertainty, no immediate regional escalation occurs. Instead, the most significant battle during this phase unfolds far from any battlefield. It becomes a contest over perception. Can the government convince its own population that authority remains secure? Can it persuade regional partners that existing commitments will continue? And can it deter potential adversaries from interpreting political uncertainty as strategic weakness? Those questions remain unanswered as the funeral concludes. Because once the ceremonies end and the cameras leave, the real transition begins. Military historians often note that governments rarely fail because they lose a single battle. More often, they fail when uncertainty begins spreading faster than authority can respond. In this fictional scenario, that becomes the central strategic challenge. For the new leadership, the immediate priority is no longer retaliation, it is credibility. Every decision is judged through a simple question: does it reinforce confidence in the state's ability to govern, or does it reveal additional uncertainty? The armed forces continue routine operations. Intelligence agencies expand internal security reviews. Diplomatic channels remain open despite increasingly difficult negotiations. To outside observers, the government appears functional. Yet analysts studying authoritarian systems understand that outward stability and internal consensus are not always the same thing. That distinction shapes every strategic calculation. Regional governments are equally cautious. Neighboring states avoid interpreting the transition as either weakness or renewed aggression. Instead, they increase intelligence collection while quietly reinforcing border security and protecting critical infrastructure. Naval patrols remain active throughout the Persian Gulf, while commercial shipping companies continue evaluating political risk alongside traditional military threats. Energy markets react in a similar fashion. In this fictional scenario, traders are influenced less by battlefield developments than by uncertainty surrounding future government policy. A single speech, cabinet appointment, or military exercise generates almost as much attention as troop movements because each may offer clues about the direction of the new leadership. Modern conflicts increasingly extend beyond military operations. Financial markets, cyber networks, supply chains, satellite imagery, and information campaigns now form part of the same strategic environment. Governments compete not only through military capability but also through perception, resilience, and economic endurance. That broader reality becomes one of the central lessons of this scenario. Another lesson concerns leadership itself. For decades, military planners often focused on the assumption that removing senior decision-makers could fundamentally alter the course of a conflict. Experience has shown a more complicated picture. Some organizations fragment under pressure. Others adapt by decentralizing authority and strengthening institutional decision-making. Success therefore depends less on the loss of an individual than on the resilience of the institutions left behind. This fictional case study illustrates exactly that principle. The decisive contest is not the strike itself. It is everything that follows. Can ministries continue functioning? Can military commanders coordinate effectively? Can intelligence organizations maintain situational awareness? Can diplomatic negotiations proceed despite political pressure? Can public confidence survive a period of extraordinary uncertainty? Those questions ultimately determine strategic outcomes far more than a single military operation. Looking further ahead, The scenario also highlights how future conflicts may increasingly combine multiple domains simultaneously. Precision strikes, cyber operations, electronic warfare, intelligence collection, economic pressure, strategic communications, and diplomatic negotiations no longer occur separately. Instead, they reinforce one another as parts of an integrated campaign. Victory is measured not only by territory gained or targets destroyed, but by the ability to influence an opponent's decision-making over time. That evolution reflects a broader transformation in modern warfare. The battlefield has expanded far beyond traditional front lines. Political institutions, financial systems, transportation networks, information ecosystems, and public confidence have all become strategic terrain. In many cases, maintaining national cohesion becomes just as important as maintaining military superiority. That is why this fictional scenario ultimately ends without a dramatic final battle. History suggests that major geopolitical shifts rarely conclude with a single decisive moment. More often, they unfold through months or even years of political adjustment, institutional adaptation, and strategic competition beneath the headlines. Whether a government emerges stronger or weaker depends on its ability to manage that transition. For analysts, the most valuable indicators are often the least dramatic leadership continuity, institutional resilience, alliance cohesion, economic stability, and the credibility of national decision-making. Those factors rarely dominate news coverage, yet they frequently determine the long-term balance of power. And perhaps that is the most important takeaway from this fictional strategic exercise. Modern conflicts are no longer decided solely by who possesses the most advanced weapons. They are decided by which state can absorb disruption, preserve institutional cohesion, adapt faster than its competitors, and convince both allies and adversaries that it remains capable of making coherent strategic decisions under extreme pressure. In the end, wars may begin with missiles, but the future is often decided by governance. And in this fictional scenario, that remains the question left unanswered long after the final ceremony has ended.